Good day, everyone. Hello, I hope that you had a nice break. I would like to call this meeting to order. This is the opening plenary and business session 1 of the Commission on Accrediting of the Association of Theological Schools. I'm Leanne Van Dyke. I serve as the chair of the Board of Commissioners. My term will be up actually at the end of the meeting tomorrow. I also serve as the president of Columbia Seminary in Atlanta, and that's where I've logged in. So welcome to this meeting. We this morning heard from Brian Blunt, kind of a comprehensive overview of the Zoom protocols, but we're going to go through some of that again, just so that if there are any new people, they can hear it again and we can refresh ourselves. So I'm happy to ask Chris Tay, the Director of Commission Information Services, to go over some of those Zoom protocols for us now. Chris.
Thank you, Leanne. Welcome, everyone. I've just put into the chat a few points of importance for our call today. Designated voters and panelists will all remain muted until the presiding officer, Leanne, has recognized you to speak. And after being recognized, then you'll be unmuted to address the gathering. A few items of note on the bottom of your screen in Zoom. If your mouse cursor or if you tap, the menus toward the bottom should appear. The buttons there, the middle one is a very important one to raise your hand. That's how you're going to be recognized by the presiding officer, and I will be assisting Leanne with spotting who has a hand raised in our session today. The right button is a Q&A, and that feature is for you to ask questions related to commission business. So that's on the right side. The chat button is on the left, and you'll use the chat function only to communicate or notify of any issues with Zoom. If you cannot hear audio, if a poll does not appear on your screen, or if you're having trouble with any of the Zoom features, go ahead and use the chat function or email me. My email address should be on the screen, and we'll help you get the technical issues sorted. There are a couple of other points, so let me also then paste some new bullet points into the chat. Our meeting is going to use the polling feature within Zoom webinars to take our vote. So you'll see a screen pop up, and you'll be careful to note your selection because once you hit submit or tap submit, there's no way to change what you've responded. So you want to think carefully about that, but think quickly as well. Mark your option and then click submit. I've also included at the very end there a link to our Canvas page with some more information about Zoom. You can pull down that Word file and get all the information about Zoom features as well as our polling feature. That's all I have for you, and Leanne, turn it back to you.
Thanks, Chris. I would like to go over some kind of business items as we convene ourselves for this meeting. Again, much of this is going to be the same as what Brian told you this morning, but these are important matters for us to organize our business together. This is a business session on the Commission on Accrediting that as you know, there are 2 different sessions for the association and for the commission. And because of these unusual circumstances, this virtual meeting, the commission will walk through some of the same initial business as the morning session did. So first of all, let me remind you of voting procedures. According to the commission's bylaws, each member school is entitled to 1 vote on each issue before the commission. The vote will be cast by the person authorized as the designated voter from each member school who was identified through the registration process, and only these designated voters that were registered for this Zoom call are authorized to vote. Designated voters will be counted for the purposes of establishing a quorum, and only those people can make motions and speak to motions. Voting will be conducted, as Chris just said, through the polling feature within the Zoom call. When a vote comes before us, before the membership, a poll will pop up on your screen, and you will then have the opportunity to cast the vote on behalf of your institution on that particular item of business. I would like to announce again the appointment of Mr. Jeffrey Kent from Mar Dissel as our judge of election. Mr. Kent is a partner at Mar Dissel, a respected leader in nonprofit accounting and auditing. As identified in the commission bylaws, the judge of election, and now I'm quoting, shall determine the number of members of record and voting power of each, the members present at the meeting, the existence of a quorum, the authenticity, validity, and effect of proxies, if any, receive votes or ballots, hear and determine all challenges and questions in any way arising in connection with the right to vote, count and tabulate all votes, determine the result, and do such acts as may be proper to conduct the election or vote with fairness to all members. So I ask Jeffrey Kent, Judge of Election, if there is a quorum for this business meeting.
Yes, we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. We have a quorum and we can proceed for the 2020 biennial meeting of the Commission on Accrediting of the Association of Theological Schools. The agenda for our meeting was distributed to you in advance. It's on page 5 to 6 of the program book. Are there any additions to the commission's business? If so, now is the time for you to speak. Are there any additions?
There are no raised hands, Leanne, at this time, and no questions through the Zoom feature.
Then, colleagues, I declare that the agenda is adopted by consensus. Now, we need to, no, we don't need to do anything else here. Okay, so now we move on to the adoption of the rules for the conduct of business. Wait a minute, do we have to vote to approve the agenda? No, the agenda was adopted by consensus. Okay.
That's right. Thank you, Leanne.
Sorry, folks, sorry. Now we move on to the adoption of rules for the conduct of business. Those you will find on pages 15 to 18 of the program book. These rules have already been approved by the ATS Board of Directors, as Brian Blunt said this morning, and the Board of Commissioners, and they have been adapted for the purposes of accommodating this online format that we find ourselves in. So these rules of conduct are adopted. In order to assist us in our business, we have appointed, as you heard this morning, Cordy Grabiak as our parliamentarian. Ms. Grabiak is a partner at K&L Gates with a specialization in nonprofit organization law. She may be called upon by me to address any areas of parliamentary process and anything having to do with the rules for the conduct of business. Cordy, do you want to just, yes, give away?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Also, to assist in our business, I have appointed a committee on reference and counsel to assist, if necessary, with any disposition of business items, particularly any motions for amendments to any of the documents that will come up in our business meeting. The committee on reference and counsel is the same as was introduced this morning. They are Todd Lajeunesse, Christine Mitchell, Betty Holly, Jay Truern, and Margaret Mwenda, the same colleagues that were identified this morning. This Committee on Reference and Counsel has a function to expedite the business of us, of the membership. The committee can be called upon by the presiding senior officer, in this case me, to work with motions or amendments that come from the floor. The committee can work with the author to perfect the language of the motion or amendment before it is presented to the membership for vote. There are several other things that the committee can do. The committee can combine similar motions into one substitute motion. It can work in consultation with the author to edit, combine, or substitute motions. It can encourage the author to take action that would not bring the motion to the assembly. It can work with the presiding officer to order the motions to be presented to the assembly. So in the interest of timely processing of business and in order to assess the full implications of any motions from the floor, new proposals or significant amendments to published reports or documents on which the membership will vote will be referred to the committee. According to the rules for conduct, motions from the floor for amendments to already published documents must be presented in two ways: orally before the body on this Zoom call, and then sent in writing to coa-vote@ats.edu. Please note that this is a different email address than Brian indicated this morning. This one is coa-vote@ats.edu. So in the email, if you make a motion verbally here and write an email to coa-vote, you need to provide a telephone contact information should the committee need to contact you about your motion. Each item to be referred to the committee will require a motion and a second in order for it to go to the committee. It requires a simple majority vote. If the motion passes for this amendment, the motion or amendment will be placed into the work of the Committee on Reference and Counsel. If the motion fails, then that motion or amendment will not be considered by the committee. That's all the nuts and bolts of how we do our work together, colleagues. Now we turn our attention to the commission business. The report of the Board of Commissioners you will find on pages 19 to 27 in your program book. I have just a few introductory remarks before we proceed. This past biennium was a busy one for the Board of Commissioners. Ordinarily, we meet twice a year in person and multiple times a year in smaller group conference calls. This year, our regular June meeting was held in a Zoom format, not unlike what we're experiencing now. But we always face an agenda-laden meeting. Over the past 2 years, the Board of Commissioners discussed and decided on more than 800 accrediting actions. Our goal always is to serve the schools well, and we hope that you all felt the dedication of your Board of Commissioners. We were also involved in the major redevelopment of the standards and policies and procedures, which we are going to take historic action on today and tomorrow. I will have an opportunity to thank the redevelopment task force by name tomorrow after our vote. But if you would like to see the list, that is on page 20. The speed of the task force, the excellent product of their work depended on 3 factors. First, the task force and its dedication. Second, the accreditation staff of ATS who resourced and guided the work. And third, you all who participated in focus groups, webinars, surveys, and other ways of providing feedback. Thank you, membership of ATS, for leaning in to this good work. I am not going to go through the report of the Board of Commissioners. You can see it on pages 19 to 27 of your program book, but do take a look. You will see a chart of accreditation actions, the names of the commissioners whose terms conclude with this meeting, the names of the schools who have been visited in this biennium, the schools who have joined ATS, received re-accreditation, become candidates for accreditation, and the names of 199 evaluation committee members. Again, your support and participation is so crucial. Thank you. We would like to hear from the chair of the commission's nominating committee. Arch Wong will be presenting the report of the committee. A vote on those nominations will happen tomorrow. Arch.
Thanks, Leanne. And if I could direct the body to the nominating committee report for the commission on pages 98 to 101 of the program book. Now, the committee began its work by reviewing the names of individuals that have been forwarded to the committee by all presidents and academic deans in the November 2019 period. The email requested include a form to be used in making recommendations. Responses were received from representatives of member schools. Commission staff also made recommendations of persons who have served as leaders and facilitators of ATS educational events, serving on accreditation committees and or contributed in a significant way to recent ATS activities. Now, what follows is the commission on accrediting slate of nominees. Now, for the Board of Commissioner Officers nominees for 2020 to 2022. The chair is Todd Lajeunesse from Sacred Heart Major Seminary. Vice Chair and Treasurer James Moore from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And the commission representative to ATS Board of Directors, Betty Hawley from Payne Theological Seminary. Now, these are the following nominees for the class of commissioners for the class of 2026. Joe Herod from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Becky Maloney, Notre Dame Seminary. Mark Morozowicz, Catholic University of America School of Theology and Religious Studies. Dwight Perry, Moody Theological Seminary. Valerie Rempel, Fresno Pacific Biblical Seminary of Fresno Pacific University. Jeff Straits, Wesley Theological Seminary. Now, public members nominated for the class of 2022, Nestor Banda, Manager of Pastoral Services and Office of Mission and Ministry, Baylor Scott and White Health. Tom Ferguson, Rector, St. John's Episcopal Church in Sandwich, Mass. Charlotte Long, Executive Director of Competency-Based Education Network. And Barry Morrison, retired pastor, Wolfville Baptist Church. Now, these are the nominees for the audit committee. Regina Dancy from Hood Theological Seminary. Tom Heinz, Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. James Moore, Trinity Evangelical Divinity Seminary School. And James is also the COA Vice Chair and Treasurer, so he's ex officio. Caleb Peacock, Pentecostal Theological Seminary. And Heather Zdanwich from Austin Presbyterian Seminary. Now the appeals panel nominees: Ed Delgado, former president of Hispanic Center for Theological Studies; Dorcas Gordon, interim director, Knox College; Greg Heil from the Aquinas Institute of Theology; David Hogue, Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary; and Jeffrey Kwan, Claremont School of Theology. Now, the Board of Commissioners wish to give a special thanks for those commissioners whose terms on the board conclude. And they are as follows. And again, special thanks to these folks. Stephen Basso from Vincent de Paul Regional Seminary; Charles Connery from Western Seminary; Sarah Drummond from Andover Newton Seminary at Yale Divinity School; Barbara Headley, senior pastor at Zion Community Baptist Church; Steve Lemke from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary; Marianne Mount, Catholic Distance University; Polly Stone from Reformed Theological Seminary; Leanne Van Dyke from Columbia Theological Seminary; Ed Delgado, and also Jeffrey Kwan from Claremont School of Theology. Those are the slates of nominees, Leanne.
Thank you very much, Arch. Appreciate that. Let me remind the colleagues present again, a repeat from this morning. According to the commission bylaws, any nominations from the floor have two requirements. First, persons have agreed in writing to serve if elected. And second, something from the floor requires the endorsement of 5 voting members, which is equal to the number of institutions represented on the nominating committee. So at this point, I'd like to ask if there are any nominations from the floor that need to be considered for our vote.
Leanne, I'm checking for hands raised. I don't see anyone with a raised hand.
All
And
right.
no posted questions on this topic.
All right. Hearing that news, I declare the nominations for the commission closed, and we will vote on the slate as presented tomorrow in the business session 2. I'd like to thank the nominating committee for their good work, for Arch, who we just heard from Steve Bosso, Susan Eberts, Mark Leeds, and Angela Sims. Thank you, folks, for your good work and these good slates. I am really happy right now to introduce to you Sarah Drummond as chair of the Redevelopment Task Force to give us her plenary address on the redevelopment of the standards. Sarah.
Thank you, Leanne. Executive Director Frank Yamada and ATS Board of Commissioners Chair Leanne Van Dyke, thank you for this opportunity to say a few words on this eve of a vote. Preparation for the vote in question has been a big part of many people's lives, including my own. Members of the Association of Theological Schools will vote on newly redeveloped standards by which we'll maintain and enhance the quality of theological education in our respective institutions. In these minutes preceding a formal motion, I'll describe what the redevelopment process was and was not, what it involved, and then I'll reflect on 2 of many leadership lessons I'll take with me as this redevelopment process comes to a close. First, what the process leading up to this vote was and was not. It was a once-in-a-generation event. The membership revises and updates standards regularly, but the last time the standards were fundamentally rebuilt was 25 years ago. The redeveloped standards you've seen and have been studying and critiquing for the past several months are no revision. At the same time, the task force didn't start from scratch. We embraced the metaphor of rehabbing a house, where the footprint stayed the same as well as the supporting walls, but virtually everything else was cleared away or rebuilt. Second, what the process involved. A lot. The redevelopment process began 6 years ago with the Educational Models Project. That project, which included the vast majority of the membership in some way, was a deep dive into what was happening at our member schools to educate theological thinkers and religious leaders. The new knowledge, both captured and created through the Educational Models Project, provided perhaps the clearest picture ever of the incredible range of practices through which studies in theology and religion and ministry were coming to life in our varied settings. Toward the end of that project, I and several other colleagues engaged in a 2-year preparatory task force charged with preparing for a 2018 vote from the membership on whether or not, and if so, how, we might go about redeveloping the standards. The task force considered what it would take to integrate all that was being learned about innovation and theological education into the ATS's commitments to quality control, truth in advertising, and continuous improvement. We wanted rigorous standards that encouraged life-giving innovation. The membership voted in Denver in 2018 to authorize a redevelopment process and to empower a mostly new task force. The redevelopment task force, the finest company in which I've ever taken part, dedicated its first year to listening and all the active research-oriented practices that capture listening and turn it into learning. The task force expanded during the first year to include subcommittees that involved those with greatest expertise in specific areas of the standards. The second year involved a similarly rigorous and interactive phase of writing, where the task force exchanged ideas, and then we, through drafts and regional and online focus groups, exchanged even more ideas with you, resulting in the document on which we will soon cast our votes. Many leadership lessons emerged during the redevelopment process. I'll focus on 2. The first is this. Sometimes the most radical change leaders can make is to choose to think differently. The membership spoke to the redevelopment task force plainly, consistently, loudly, and clearly. You said the current standards are too long, too prescriptive, and too one-size-fits-all in a way that privileges schools that reside within the bulwarks of cultural hegemony. The task force responded to those nearly univocal critiques, not by slashing and burning, but by looking at the whole concept of standards from a different point of view. Instead of obliterating the current standards, and instead of tweaking them, we elevated them to a higher level of abstraction. The membership was ready, really ready for change, which tempted us to go with something drastic for drastic's sake. As you can see from the redeveloped standards, this shift in attention did lead to a dramatic change, more subversive than meets the eye. But the change began with a change in perspective. The second related lesson was about the importance of stressing principles over practice. In order to elevate the current standards to a higher plane of abstraction, we needed to ask the question, why, thousands of times. Here's an example of a fictional conversation that illustrates my point. Schools can only admit 15% without a bachelor's degree. Why? Because this is graduate school, and the work levels and atmosphere of professional seasoned inquiry should reflect graduate school. Okay, then why not just say the latter part? Describe the hoped for atmosphere rather than an arbitrary percentage. Because describing an atmosphere is hard. Is it though? Is it really that hard? You just did it. To move from principles to practice requires a thoughtful conversation about origin stories. Each of our schools has an internal mythology behind what we do and why we do it that way. We teach at certain times and in certain locations, and started doing so for reasons we've sometimes forgotten. Occasionally, we're asked to make a change, and only then do we find out why we started doing something in the first place. Sometimes the reason is good. Other times, the reason was good a long time ago, but no longer serves. This movement from practices to the principles that inspired the practices is hard but cathartic work. It's cathartic because it's liberating. When we realize we're doing something we don't have to do, that was appropriate for other people in another time, we're free to change. When our institutions don't look exactly like every other institution, especially the most powerful ones, principles give us honor and allow varied colleagues to hone in on principles we all hold dear. During the standards redevelopment process, I became obsessed with distinguishing principles from practices in my own work as a dean of a historic and now embedded seminary. That obsession helped me to respond quickly, for example, to COVID-19. The crisis that descended on our world some months ago didn't call on us simply to move classes and programs online. We needed to think about the principles behind those classes and those programs and re-envision how we'd honor those principles under strange and challenging circumstances. In this way, the crisis of COVID-19 has provided an early test of our newly redeveloped standards, for it's demonstrated how much flexibility schools are going to need if they're to respond nimbly in a season of rapid and dramatic change. Before you, you have newly redeveloped ATS standards. I, my Vice Chair, Oliver McMahon, and the Standards Redevelopment Task Force stand by them. We believe them to be inclusive, exhaustive, and principled. We expect they will spur good conversation in our institutions about how our principles inspire our practices and how we must renew our minds so that we might respond faithfully to the cries of the aching world we serve. If we were in a ballroom in Vancouver right now, and oh, how I wish we were, I would ask all members of the Redevelopment Task Force to rise in body or in spirit. Then I would ask those who were part of a subcommittee to do the same. Then I would ask those who attended a focus group to rise. Then I would ask those who filled out a survey on the standards to rise. Except for the newest deans and presidents among you, I would by then imagine that all would have risen. And I'd say this: our task force has done its work, but yours is just beginning. the redeveloped standards will call on you to state your principles, even the most tacitly understood principles, and align your practices with them. They will give you flexibility, but they insist you demonstrate the validity of how you're using that flexibility. They make more room for emergent models, and they make no room for schools with traditional models to rest on their laurels. What I can promise you, based on my own experience, is that this work will not just improve your schools, it will change you. With and only with God's help, may it be so. Thank you. Leanne?
Sarah, thank you so much. That was a wonderful perspective on the challenge of the committee and the thoroughness with which you led all of us in this task. Colleagues, we are now getting ready to call for the motion for the approval of the redeveloped standards and policies and bylaws. We have a couple of reminders and business items to attend to first. I would like to call your attention to the final version of the new Standards of Accreditation, new policies and procedures, and revised commission bylaws on pages 28 through 94 in your program book. In just a moment, the motion will be presented. It does not require a second because it is a motion of the Board of Commissioners. Please be reminded that motions from the floor for amendments to already published documents must be presented orally before the body in this Zoom call and then sent in writing to coa-vote@ats.edu. And then that will be the signal for it to be considered by the Committee on Reference and Counsel. Once we are done with discussing this important motion, we will actually recess for the rest of the day. This allows the Committee on Reference and Counsel to do their potential work of ordering possible amendments. That is how we will proceed. I would like to call upon Sarah Drummond, member of the Board of Commissioners and chair of the Redevelopment Task Force, to make the motion.
On behalf of the Board of Commissioners, I move the following. Based on the work of the Redevelopment Task Force since June 2018, that sought, received, and assimilated extraordinarily broad input from the membership, the Board of Commissioners unanimously recommends to the Commission membership approval of the final version of the following documents during the 24-25 June 2020 biennial meeting: the new Standards of Accreditation, the policies in new policies and procedures, and corollary changes to revised commission bylaws, all effective July 1st, 2020, per board approved implementation procedures.
Thank you, Sarah, for that motion. We now have a motion on the floor to approve the proposed standards of accreditation, policies and procedures, and commission bylaws. As I said a moment ago, this motion comes with the full endorsement of the Board of Commissioners. Therefore, it is moved by the Board of Commissioners and does not require a second. It is now on the floor, friends, for our discussion. Please indicate by raising your hand if you would like to have a word, and Chris Tay will look out for you. Is there anyone that wishes to speak?
We'll just give it a moment. Leanne, I did see a hand go up and then go down. It seems like folks are testing that feature in Zoom.
Right,
So that is the correct
the correct way to do it.
way to be recognized. That's right.
We have 219 people on the call. Is there anyone that would like to speak?
James Brenneman has a hand raised.
Please speak. James, make sure you unmute.
Yes.
Yes, there you go.
Thank you. By the way, thank you for these, for the standards as presented. I am very much appreciative of them. I was particularly fascinated, and this is just more of a comment of support, but just wanting to make sure as well for clarification on standard number 6 with regard to the library. And by the way, I fully support the statement as written. But as I read it, we talk about resources, and never once mention books. And I'm guessing that was a deliberate decision, one of which I support in this move in this direction and into the future. So could someone speak to that, just to, with regard to the decision to do that? I think in the past, for example, we imagined that there were times when you needed 10,000 books to begin a seminary and those kinds of things. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'm wondering if Debbie or Tom or Sarah or Oliver, I'm sure one of you could jump in and reflect. Debbie, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Debbie Creamer. I serve as Senior Director of Accrediting. I also worked with Mitzi Buddy on the subcommittee that worked on the library standard. We talked a lot with librarians as well as with folks who use libraries in all of the different roles. And so the language there, and Jim, even the way you highlighted there, resources in some ways become secondary to services. And not secondary meaning it's less valuable, but that the most important piece is to think about the services that we have available to our students and to our other users. And then to recognize that the resources that libraries provide are more than just books. So resources there really is meant to be an inclusive term that would include the sorts of resources that best serve your students and your curricular plan at each institution grounded in its own mission and context. So you're right that it no longer talks about the number of books being the most important thing, but it's really thinking holistically about the ways in which libraries, librarians and library services, as well as the library resources add value to our institutions.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Thanks for that comment, Jim. Is there anyone else, Chris, that you see?
Looking through the chat and the Q&A, and I do not see anything at this time.
Okay.
Also looking for raised hands, of course. That's the proper way to be recognized.
Friends, I want to give you plenty of time to participate. Neither do we need to wait too long. It's kind of the right moment. Appreciated Jim's comment of the library standard. I am ready to what we would be doing is voting to close the debate. Well, we're not debating, to close this for the moment and postpone the vote until tomorrow. We're not voting today. That is on the agenda for tomorrow. And here's my hunch that the relative lack of hands up really reflects what Sarah talked about a moment ago, namely that this has been the most comprehensively thoughtful process. And we come to Vancouver virtually ready to go. So let me skip ahead to where I need to be. And Chris, unless there's something further, I'm ready to postpone the vote, which we will reactivate tomorrow. That requires a motion, a second, and a vote, which we'll do with a poll. So may I have a motion to postpone the vote on the motion on the floor?
Yes, Robin Steinke has
Thank
moved
you.
and Andrew Wakefield has seconded.
Thank you. Is there any debate on that? Let us vote on this motion to postpone the vote. We have about 30 seconds left to vote. And then we will close the vote. Do we have a report on the vote?
The voting has approached about 1 minute. If we follow like we did in the very beginning of the ATS session 1, a full 2 minutes for voting, just so we have as much opportunity for folks to get in their votes.
We discovered that only 1 minute was needed, but let's give 2 minutes for this vote, and anything further, perhaps we can amend that time limit.
Sure thing. About 35 seconds or so from now. In about 10 seconds, Leanne, I think you can let me know to close the vote, and then we'll have the judge of election look at the results.
Perfect. The vote is now closed. Mr. Kern, let me know what you have for me when you have it.
Yes, the motion has passed.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, the motion to postpone the vote until tomorrow has passed. There's one more vote that we need to take, and that is a vote to recess. Now, let's be clear. We recess tomorrow until 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern time. So the two association meetings are the bookends, and the commission meetings are the ones in the middle. So we come back as a commission tomorrow morning, 11 Eastern time. And you have to then log into that special link for business session 2 that you have received. I do need a motion to recess, and I also need a second.
I see Douglas Rutt has moved, and I thought I saw Angela Sims as the second.
Thank you very much. I doubt that we need a 2-minute voting window for that. Is there any discussion on this motion to recess? Hearing none. Friends, all those in favor of recessing until tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock Eastern time, please vote now. We'll give you 1 minute this time. 30 seconds, folks. The voting has closed. We will wait for the result.
The motion has passed.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Friends, our meeting is in recess until tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock Eastern time. We can't quite let out a big whoop of joy quite yet. The vote hasn't yet happened, but it will. And we are very, very grateful. Frank or Chris, is there anything else that we need to do before we say goodbye?
Well,
No.
there was one question that came in through the Q&A, and I think it's a good one to address. We also addressed it with Brian's session earlier today, and whether there could be some indication of the percentage of voters for the vote. And so I'd defer to Leanne as chair, perhaps to call upon Mr. Kent again as a judge of election to address that.
Are those numbers right in front of you, Mr. Kent? Is that something you can give us for the votes that we took this afternoon?
Sure. The motion to postpone passed at approximately 94%.
Thank you very much. What about the motion to recess?
That was closer to 99%.
Okay. Thank you for that question. We will attend to that tomorrow and make sure we provide that information as well. Friends, we are adjourned. See you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne.